You ever wonder about those little things that go bump in the night? It's so easy for us to just brush them off, right? But for our ancestors, those strange sounds weren't just the house settling. Nope, they were a sign of something else, something small, something clever, and something you were never supposed to see. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of folklore's most persistent and honestly most fascinating creatures, the goblin. I mean, really think about that for a second. That creepy feeling of being watched when you're alone. The car keys that just vanish, only to show up right where you already looked. For hundreds of years, people didn't just chalk it up to being forgetful. Nah, they whispered a single word for it: goblins.
So if we really want to get to the bottom of what a goblin is, we've got to look past the green-skinned, pointy-eared monsters from movies and video games. We need to rewind, go way back to a time when these creatures were more of a feeling, a presence you felt in the dark but almost never actually saw. Now, look at this list. See a pattern? This isn't epic world-ending stuff. We're not talking about demons or dragons here. This is the small, annoying, totally inexplicable chaos of everyday life. Goblins weren't a threat to your life. They were a threat to your sanity. They were the little tricksters living in the corners of your world, behind the walls, under the floorboards, just making mischief. And the name itself tells you pretty much everything you need to know. Just look at the roots of the word: a haunting spirit, a rogue, a trickster. The language people use to describe them paints a picture not of a killer, but of a pest, a little troublemaker designed to unravel your mind one tiny prank at a time.
And this is what was really so terrifying. A goblin wasn't just good or evil, it was pure chaos. If you left out a bowl of milk as a sign of respect, hey, maybe they'd help you out. But if you forgot, or even worse, if you insulted them, your entire life could turn into a living nightmare. It was that complete unpredictability that kept people up at night.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. This whole idea of a small, mischievous spirit, it wasn't just a European thing, not by a long shot. It's a pattern that pops up all over the world in cultures that had no contact with each other. Just take a look. In Germany, you've got the kobold, a spirit that haunts a single house. Over in Korea, there's the dokabebi, which is born from an old, discarded object, like a broom. You've got the genuinely dangerous tokoloshe from African folklore, and the pukwudgie, these little tricksters from Native American forests. The names change, the details are a little different, but that core concept, a small, smart, and potentially dangerous being, it's unbelievably consistent.
So you have to ask yourself, how is that possible? How did all these different cultures, separated by huge oceans and entire continents, all independently cook up such similar creatures? Is that just a massive coincidence, or does it point to something much deeper, a kind of fear that all of us, as humans, share?
And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? Goblins served a purpose. They were a psychological tool. Long before science could explain why the floorboards creak or why you have a string of bad luck, these stories gave a face to those fears. Goblins became the living, breathing symbol of everything we couldn't control, all that chaos lurking just outside the campfire light. But, as our stories evolved, so did our need for a bad guy we could actually see. So how did this shapeless, invisible fear get dragged out into the light? Well, the goblin was about to get a major makeover. You can literally watch the transformation happen right here. It starts in the 1800s when writers gave them these complex societies and some pretty sinister motives. Then, boom, J.R.R. Tolkien comes along and basically uses them as the foot soldiers of evil in Middle-earth. Dungeons and Dragons completely cements their role as a classic fantasy enemy, the first monster you fight. And that brings us to today, where they're almost always shown as these grotesque, snarling little monsters. But here's the thing. Even after all those changes, from an unseen spirit to a full-on fantasy monster, the fundamental DNA of the goblin survived. They are still defined by that powerful, terrifying combination. They're small, they're smart, and they're dangerous. Which, of course, brings us to the big one, the question that's been kind of lurking in the shadows this whole time. After all this history, all this folklore, what's the final verdict? All right, let's just put it out there plain and simple. After everything we've looked at, the ancient stories, the psychology, how they've changed in our modern world, what's the answer? Are they real? Well, the answer really depends on what you mean by real, doesn't it? Scientifically, is there any physical proof? Nope. Not a single bone, not a footprint, nothing. But culturally? Oh yeah, in the stories we tell, in the art we make, and in the fears they represent, they are very, very real. See, at the end of the day, goblins aren't creatures made of flesh and blood. They're living ideas. They're stories we tell ourselves to explain the parts of the world that scare us. And they've survived for thousands of years because the fundamental human fears they tap into, our fear of chaos, our fear of the dark, our fear of what we just can't see, those have never, ever gone away.
So maybe, just maybe, goblins aren't hiding in our walls anymore. But the fear that created them in the first place, that deep, primal anxiety over things we can't control, that still lives inside all of us. And as this final thought suggests, legends that are born from emotions that powerful, well, they never truly disappear. They just wait.